Donovan Reese was 38 years old, and for 12 years he'd kept one secret from everyone in his life, including his own wife. 3 mornings a week, before sunrise, he trained quietly at a small dojo, earning a black belt almost no one outside those walls knew existed. It never came up at home. It never needed to. Then came the night his wife Kendra's tablet lit up on the counter with a message from a man saved only as B, words far too intimate for a colleague. Weeks later, in a ballroom full of her co-workers and his own clients, Donovan watched that same man, confident, smiling, certain of his place beside Kendra, look him up and down and call him less than a man. Bryce Calloway leaned in close, daring him to prove otherwise, daring him to fight right there in front of everyone. With no idea what 12 years of discipline had built inside the man he was mocking, Donovan stood perfectly still. And in that silence, he made a decision Bryce never saw coming. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. The dojo was dark when Donovan arrived. That was how he liked it. He let himself in with his key, flipped on the single row of overhead lights above the training floor, and stood there for a moment in the quiet. The space smelled like cedar and old canvas. The mats were worn smooth in the center from years of footwork. A row of framed certificates hung on the far wall, and somewhere behind the front desk, his black belt hung in his locker where it had lived for 12 years, folded neatly inside a small cedar box that he'd built himself. He didn't think about that belt much. It was just a thing he'd earned, the way he'd earned most things in his life. Slowly, without announcing it, he pulled on his GI, wrapped his hands out of habit, and started moving. No music, no timer, just the sound of his own breathing and the soft percussion of bare feet on canvas as he worked through his forms. Low stance, controlled rotation, each strike snapping out and pulling back with the same clean economy. He wasn't performing for anyone. He never was. That was the whole point of coming before sunrise, before the city woke up and started needing things from him. He trained for an hour. Then he locked up, drove home through the gray pre-dawn streets, and showered quietly so he wouldn't wake Kendra. By 7, he was at the workshop. Reese and Tatum Custom Furniture sat in a converted auto body garage on the east side of the city, wedged between a dry cleaner and a family-owned hardware store that Donovan had been buying lumber fasteners from since before he had a business license. The sign above the roll-up door was simple, black letters on bare steel, because Donovan had made it himself, and he wasn't interested in anything flashy. Wes was already inside when he arrived, sitting on an overturned crate with a coffee in each hand and a crease in his forehead that meant he'd been thinking since before his alarm went off. "You check the alderman invoice?" Wes asked, holding out one of the coffees. Donovan took it. "Last night. Numbers are right. I moved the delivery to Thursday. Their loading dock's getting repaved Wednesday." "Good catch." Wes nodded and went back to his coffee. And that was that. That was most of their mornings. 2 men who'd known each other long enough that they didn't need to fill the silence just to prove they were comfortable in it. They'd built the business from nothing over 9 years, first out of Donovan's garage, then a rented space, then this place, which they'd renovated themselves over the course of one very long summer. Wes handled the finances and client scheduling with a quiet precision that Donovan trusted completely. Donovan handled the builds, the design consultations, the careful hours of fitting and finishing that turned raw hardwood into something worth keeping. They had 6 steady commercial accounts and more individual clients than they could comfortably handle, which was a good problem to have. Donovan sanded the face frame of a white oak cabinet until 11, broke for lunch, and didn't think about anything except the grain of the wood and whether the drawer slides were perfectly level. It was a good day. It was at dinner that the small wrongness found him again. Kendra came home at 7:40, which was not unusual anymore. She kissed him on the cheek, set her bag down, and moved through the kitchen with the efficient, slightly distracted energy of someone whose brain was still in a meeting. She'd been doing that a lot lately. Coming home already somewhere else. "Long one?" he asked. "Client thing." She opened the fridge. "Did you eat?" "Saved you a plate." She reheated it without asking what it was, which wasn't like her. A year ago, she would have lifted the lid and said, "This smells incredible. What did you put in it?" Now she just ate, standing at the counter, scrolling through her phone with one thumb. He noticed the perfume. It wasn't the one he'd given her for her birthday. A warm, amber scent she'd worn for years. This one was lighter, sharper. Something he didn't recognize. He didn't say anything. He noticed the phone, too. When she finally sat down across from him, she laid it on the table face down, screen pressed to the wood. She used to leave it face up. She used to not think about it at all. 3 weeks ago it had been a client dinner on a Tuesday that ran until 10, then another one on a Thursday, then a Friday, where she texted him at 8 to say, "Don't wait up. This is running long," and he'd fallen asleep on the couch, waiting anyway. He wasn't a man who jumped to conclusions. He was a man who noticed things and waited to understand them. So, he noticed. And he waited. Later, while he was cleaning up the kitchen, Kendra stepped out to the back porch to take a call. Her tablet sat on the counter near the dish rack, charging. It buzzed once. The screen lit up with a notification preview. A message from a contact saved as nothing but a single letter. B. The preview sat there for 3 full seconds before the screen went dark. Long enough for Donovan to read every word. Tonight was perfect. I keep thinking about... Then, nothing. He set down the dish he was holding. Slowly. Carefully. The way a man sets something down when his hands need to stay busy, so the rest of him doesn't move. He didn't sleep much. He lay on his side of the bed and listened to Kendra breathe, slow and even, like a person with nothing to hide. He watched the ceiling. He thought about the preview on that screen. He thought about the single letter, B, saved without a last name, without a title, without anything that would explain itself to a curious husband. People don't erase names unless they have a reason. By 5 he was up, moving through the dark hallway to the kitchen, starting the coffee and not thinking too hard about any of it. That was his discipline. Not the kicks, not the forms, but this. The ability to sit with something uncomfortable without letting it run him. At 6:15, Kendra came downstairs in a hurry. She was already dressed, already in the slightly distracted mode that meant her brain had skipped breakfast and gone straight to the day ahead. Blazer, heels, the sharp, unfamiliar perfume. "Early meeting," she said, pouring coffee into a travel mug without looking at him. "I heard you moving around up there." "Presentation got moved to 8. She snapped the lid on the mug. "Don't know when I'll be back tonight." "Okay." She kissed him on the cheek. Quick, automatic, the same way she'd been kissing him for months. And then she was gone. The front door pulled shut behind her with a soft click. Donovan stood in the kitchen. The tablet sat on the counter exactly where it had been the night before. Still plugged in. Still unlocked. The screen had gone dark on its own, but when he reached out and pressed the button on the side, it lit right up. She'd forgotten to lock it. He stood there for a moment, his coffee warm in his hand. He was not a man who went looking for things. He'd always believed that. He believed in giving people room, in trusting what you'd been given until something changed. Something had changed. He set down his coffee, picked up the tablet, and opened the messages. The contact was still listed as B. The thread went back 9 months. He didn't rush through it. He read the way he worked, methodically, from the beginning, letting each piece settle before moving to the next. The early messages were careful, almost professional in tone. Then, the careful stopped. By February, they were making plans. By March, the plans had a pattern. Evenings labeled as client dinners, a weekend away framed as a conference in Portland. A hotel name dropped without any attempt to explain what it was doing in a conversation between two colleagues. The details didn't fall apart under reading. They were worn smooth, practiced, the way a lie gets when it's been told enough times. Then he found the name. It surfaced in a message from late March, Kendra writing, "Bryce, just be careful on the Reese and Tatum stuff." And then something cold and settling moved through Donovan's chest, quiet as a stone dropping into still water. Bryce. He knew exactly one Bryce. Bryce Calloway. Mid-40s, sharp dresser, the kind of man who laughed a little too loudly at his own jokes and called everyone brother like it meant something. He'd come around the workshop twice in the past few months, introduced through a mutual contact as a private investor looking to partner with small craft businesses in the city. He'd walked the floor, admired the work with a little too much enthusiasm, and talked about unlocking the brand's full potential, in the same polished tone people use when they've said the same sentence to 10 different people that week. Donovan had been polite. He hadn't committed to anything. Now he understood why Kendra had been so eager for him to take the meeting. He kept reading. There was a message from Kendra about the workshop's equity structure that sat in the middle of a thread that was otherwise about hotel rooms and inside jokes. She wasn't just sleeping with him. She was feeding him information, small amounts, carefully placed, like a person who knew exactly what she was doing. Donovan's face stayed flat. He went to his phone, opened the camera, and started photographing the screen. Not every message. The ones that mattered. The name, the dates, the hotel, the equity comment, the plans disguised as work events. He worked through it the way he worked through a complicated build, taking stock of each piece, setting it in the right order, making sure nothing was missing. When he was done, he had 19 screenshots. He reviewed each one. Then he set the tablet back on the counter in the exact position he'd found it, corner aligned with the edge of the dish rack, charging cable draped the same way, and pressed the side button until the screen locked. He stood there. He thought about going to the bedroom. He thought about a lot of things. He let himself think them. And then he let them pass, because none of them were useful right now. What was useful was information, and he was only at the beginning of it. He picked up his phone and called Wes. It rang twice. "You're up early," Wes said. "Can you meet me before we open?" A short pause. Wes knew him well enough to hear the difference. "Yeah," he said. "I'm on my way." Wes was already there when Donovan pulled up. He was sitting on the front step of the workshop, a paper coffee cup in each hand, the morning still gray and cool around him. He handed one up without a word as Donovan unlocked the door. They went inside. Donovan hit the lights. The shop smelled the way it always did. Sawdust and linseed oil and something underneath both of those things that had no name, but felt like work. He set his bag down on the bench and stood there for a moment, and then he told Wes everything. He didn't dress it up. He said it straight, the way he'd say anything. "Here's what I found. Here's what it means. Here's what I know so far." He showed Wes the screenshots on his phone. Wes looked at each one. He didn't interrupt. He didn't make noise. He just looked, and when he was done, he handed the phone back and stared at the floor for a long moment. "Bryce Calloway," Wes said. Not a question. "Yeah." Wes shook his head slowly. "He walked through here. He shook my hand." "I know." "And she was feeding him our equity structure." "That's what it looks like." Wes set down his coffee cup on the edge of the workbench. He pressed 2 fingers against the bridge of his nose. Donovan watched him process it, the anger moving through him like weather, visible and then gone. "What do you need from me?" Wes asked. "Right now? Nothing. Stay quiet. Stay alert. Don't change anything. If Bryce reaches out about the deal, you're still interested. And Kendra?" "Same as always." Wes looked at him. "You're sure about this?" "I'm sure," Donovan said. "I just need to know what we're actually dealing with before I move." Wes nodded once. That was enough for both of them. The gala was at the Harmon, a tall downtown hotel with high ceilings and waitstaff who moved like they'd been trained not to be noticed. It was a charity event for a children's literacy foundation. One of those evenings where people paid a lot of money to feel good about themselves in formal clothes. Donovan had a client on the sponsorship committee. They'd been on the guest list for 2 months. He wore his dark gray suit. Kendra wore a red dress that fit perfectly and said nothing on the drive over. The room was full by the time they arrived. Warm light, low music, clusters of people with drinks, and the smooth, practiced smiles of professionals in a social setting. Donovan spotted 2 of his furniture clients near the bar. He spotted Kendra's work colleagues at a round table near the stage. And then, 20 minutes in, he spotted Bryce. Bryce Calloway was holding a glass of bourbon like it owed him something. He was dressed sharp, dark suit, open collar, the easy confidence of a man who had never once walked into a room and felt small. He was talking to a group of people near the far wall, laughing at something, his voice carrying just slightly above the ambient noise, the way some voices did when their owners weren't trying to control them. Kendra saw him too. Donovan felt her go still beside him. Just for a second, a small, involuntary thing, barely a breath. And then she smoothed it over and turned to say something to a coworker. But he'd felt it. He let the evening move. He talked to his clients. He ate what was put in front of him. He was pleasant and easy and present, and the whole time he kept a quiet awareness of where both of them were in the room, the way he'd been trained to know the distance between himself and anyone who might become a problem. Bryce had been watching him for a while. Donovan had felt it. Around 9 o'clock, the feeling got closer. "You're Donovan Reese." Bryce appeared at his elbow, bourbon in hand, the smile of a man who believed charm was a form of power. "The furniture guy." "That's right. I've been meaning to follow up about that meeting." Bryce's eyes did a quick sweep of him. The suit, the quiet posture, the absence of anything that looked like performance. Something in the sweep was a dismissal. "Good work you do. Very craftsman-y." Donovan looked at him. "Thanks." Bryce smiled wider. There were people nearby, listening without looking. Kendra had gone still across the room. "I'm just saying," Bryce continued, his voice rising just enough, "a man who's good with his hands. That's a particular kind of skill." "Nothing wrong with it." Donovan said nothing. "I mean, not everyone can build a company. Some guys, you know, they build tables." He laughed at his own words, glancing around to see who was listening. "No offense. None taken." The smile on Bryce's face got harder at the edges. He hadn't expected that. He hadn't expected nothing. "You're a very calm guy, Donovan. Has anyone ever told you that? Like, eerily calm. Not a lot going on behind the eyes." He tilted his glass. "I wonder sometimes if that's a real man thing or a furniture thing?" Someone nearby had stopped their own conversation. Donovan looked at Bryce the way he looked at a joint that wasn't fitting right. Patient, precise, measuring what adjustment was needed. "You should stop," Donovan said quietly. Bryce laughed. "There it is." He turned outward now, including the people around them. "See? I've been wondering about you. What kind of man lets everything just happen to him and doesn't do a thing about it?" He set his glass on the nearest surface. "You want to do something about it? Right now?" "No," Donovan said. "No." Bryce repeated it to the room. "No. Right. Because you build furniture." He stepped half a step closer. "Come on. Let's see what you're actually made of. Or is standing here quietly the best you've got?" The room had gone mostly quiet. Kendra stood frozen near the far table, her face a color that had nothing to do with the lighting. Donovan looked at Bryce for a long moment. Then he looked at the space around them. The open floor, the people who had stopped pretending not to watch. "Move the tables back," Donovan said. Bryce blinked. "You asked twice," Donovan said. "That's enough asking. Move the tables back." What happened next lasted less than 90 seconds. There was no swinging, no posturing. When Bryce lunged forward, Because that was the only move a man like that had, Donovan was no longer where he'd been. He moved the way he moved at Iron Gate. Economical, quiet, without wasted energy. He redirected the momentum, controlled the arm, and put Bryce on the floor with a single clean motion that made almost no sound at all. Bryce scrambled up, tried again, got further this time, made contact with Donovan's lapel, and then found himself turned, off balance, taken down again in a way that left him facing the ceiling with Donovan's knee at his back and one arm locked at a precise angle that said, very clearly, "This ends when you say it ends." The room was silent. "Tap," Donovan said. Bryce held out for 3 seconds that felt much longer. Then his hand hit the floor. Donovan released him, stood, and straightened his jacket. He looked around the room once, not triumphantly, just the steady, even sweep of a man checking that everything was in order. And then he picked up his jacket from where it had shifted slightly at the shoulder, adjusted it, and walked toward the exit. He didn't look at Kendra. He didn't look back at Bryce, still on the floor, being helped up by 2 men who hadn't volunteered to watch but couldn't now pretend they hadn't. The front doors of the Harmon pushed open into the cool night air, and Donovan walked through them alone. The phone started before 7. Donovan was already up. He'd made coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and watched the early light come through the window above the sink the way it always did, pale and flat, and without opinion. The first text came from Marcus Webb, one of his furniture clients who'd been at the gala. It said, "Man, just checking in. You good?" Then 3 more. Then a missed call from a number he didn't recognize. Then a voicemail from his client on the sponsorship committee that he saved without listening to yet. He put the phone face down on the table. He heard Kendra on the stairs before he saw her. Her footsteps had a particular quality that morning. Careful, controlled, the sound of a person choosing every step. She came into the kitchen in her robe and went straight for the coffee without looking at him. She poured her cup. She stood at the counter with her back to him for a moment longer than necessary. Then she turned around. "You need to call Bryce," she said. Donovan looked at her. "Why would I do that?" "To apologize." She held her mug with both hands. Her voice had that particular evenness to it, the one that meant she'd already decided how this conversation would go. "What happened last night was embarrassing, Donovan. Those are my co-workers. Some of those people are my clients. He challenged me. You didn't have to accept. He did it twice." She set her mug down. "This isn't about who started it. This is about what people saw, and what they're going to be saying, and how that affects my career." She looked at him straight. "A simple apology smooths this over. For both of us." Donovan picked up his coffee. "I'll think about it." That wasn't the answer she wanted. He could see it in the small tension around her eyes. But she didn't push further. She pivoted instead, as she always did when she felt the ground shift under an argument. She said something about a morning call she had to take, picked up her mug, and moved toward the hallway. At the doorway, she stopped. "I just need you to think about me here," she said. Her voice had gone softer. An adjustment. "That's all I'm asking." "I hear you," Donovan said. She left. He waited until he heard the bedroom door close. Then he picked up his phone, opened Marcus Webb's text, and typed back, "I'm good. Thanks for asking." Then he called Wes. They met at the workshop at 6 that evening, after the last client pickup. Wes had already pulled up their shared business account on his laptop when Donovan arrived. He'd also printed 3 months of statements and laid them across the workbench in a single long row, end to end like a timeline. "I started here," Wes said, pointing to a line item from 4 months back. $240 out of the contingency fund. I marked it because it didn't match anything I'd authorized. Donovan leaned over the bench. Then here. Wes moved his finger forward on the timeline. 350, then 400, then 280. Always under 500. Always spaced apart just enough that it wouldn't trigger a flag. They weren't round numbers. That was the thing that stood out most. Round numbers were careless. These were specific, irregular, and carefully timed. The signature of someone who understood how accounts got reviewed. And the personal side? Donovan asked. Wes opened a second window on the laptop. The joint savings account. Same pattern. Smaller amounts, but consistent. Started about 6 months ago. Donovan looked at the dates. Then he looked at the printed statements again. He'd brought a folder with him. The screenshots from Kendra's tablet, organized by date. He opened it and laid 3 of them next to the bank pages. The overlap was clean. A withdrawal on a Tuesday. A message from Bryce 2 days later referencing a dinner. A charge at the Dunmore Hotel that same Thursday. Another withdrawal the following week. A message from Bryce about a gift. You're going to love it. And then a line item that matched, almost to the day, a purchase at a men's jeweler downtown. She was funding it, Wes said. Part of it, yeah. With our contingency money. And our savings. Wes straightened up. He looked at the papers spread across the bench, and then he looked at Donovan, and the expression on his face was not anger exactly. It was the look of a man who had just understood the full shape of something he'd only seen one side of before. He closed the laptop slowly. The workshop was quiet. The smell of sawdust and linseed oil sat in the air the way it always did after hours, familiar, steady, the smell of work that was real. How far do you want to take this? Wes asked. Donovan looked at the papers, the statements, the screenshots, the careful, patient pattern of a betrayal that had been running alongside his life for months, without him knowing. Everything, he said. Not because I'm angry. He looked up. Because I want every piece of it. Adriana's office was on the 4th floor of a building on Clement Street, sandwiched between an insurance firm and a tax consultant. The hallway smelled like old carpet and printer toner. Her door had her name on it in plain black letters. No flourish, no tagline. Just Adriana Reese, attorney at law. That was very much like her. Donovan knocked and pushed it open. She was already behind her desk, reading something, glasses perched at the end of her nose. She looked up once, looked back down, and said, "Sit." He sat. She finished reading whatever it was. She always finished what she was doing before shifting gears, a habit he'd watched her practice since they were teenagers. And then she folded her glasses, set them on the desk, and looked at him properly. "Talk," she said. He talked. He laid it out in order. The tablet notification, the text thread, the screenshots, the financial records, the gala. He put the folder on her desk and let her go through it herself, which is what she'd want. He didn't editorialize. He didn't slow down for emotion. He just told her what he'd found and what it looked like. Adriana read through the screenshots slowly, moving from page to page with the same attention she gave every document. She had a yellow legal pad at her elbow, and she made notes as she went. Short, clipped notations in handwriting so small he could never read it across a table. When she finished, she set the folder down and pressed the tips of her fingers together. "The withdrawals are the most usable piece," she said. "The affair itself isn't actionable in a no-fault state, but money taken from a joint account for personal use outside the marriage, especially from a business contingency fund you didn't jointly manage, that's a different conversation." "How different?" "Different enough that a judge notices." She turned the bank statement toward him and pointed to a cluster of dates. "These line items out of the contingency fund, is Kendra a signatory on that account?" "She was added 2 years ago," Donovan said, "when we consolidated some accounts." Adriana wrote something. "Does she have any operational role in the business?" "No." "Any investor status, ownership stake, anything that would give her a legitimate reason to authorize withdrawals?" "Nothing." "Good." She made another note. "That makes recovery cleaner. It also makes the argument for who actually built the business cleaner, which matters if there's ever a valuation dispute." She paused. "And there will be." Donovan watched her. She moved through the legal terrain like she moved through a room. Straight lines, no wasted steps. "I'm going to pull the full ownership structure on the workshop," she said. "Your filing document, any amendments, the operating agreement if you have one with Wes. I want to see what's explicitly yours, what's jointly held, and where the marital property lines sit. Wes and I can get you whatever you need." She nodded and reached for a second folder she'd set to the side of her desk. He noticed it only now, a thin manila folder with a small paper clip at the top. She'd already been working before he arrived. She opened it and pushed it across to him. "I started pulling the background on Bryce's firm before you got here," she said. "Just publicly available records. I wanted to see what kind of entity we were dealing with." Donovan looked at the papers inside. A business profile, some corporate filings, and near the back, a printed email thread with a header he recognized. It was from the workshop's business domain, Wes's address. He read the first few lines. Then he read them again. It was a conversation between Wes and a representative at Bryce's investment firm. The messages were recent. They were cordial and professional, and they discussed, in measured language, the possibility of a buyout, a partial acquisition of the workshop that would bring in outside capital and restructure ownership. "Wes didn't tell me about this," Donovan said. "I don't think he knew it was as far along as it was," Adriana said. Her voice stayed flat. "Look at the dates. The initial outreach came from Bryce's firm directly to Wes, not to you. Specifically to Wes." She tapped the page. "And these messages. Someone framed this as a routine growth opportunity. Easy language, friendly tone, but the structure they're proposing would dilute your stake significantly." Donovan set the paper down. He looked at the wall behind Adriana's desk. There was a framed print there, a botanical diagram, some kind of fern, all careful lines and labeled parts. He'd looked at it before without really seeing it. He was seeing it now. "She was moving on 2 tracks," he said. It wasn't a question. "The affair got her close enough to Bryce to make it happen," Adriana said. "The financial withdrawals kept things funded, and the buyout conversation would have finished it. Your business, restructured out from under you, while you were focused on the marriage falling apart." The room was quiet. Donovan placed his hands flat on his knees and breathed out once, slow and even. "Don't react yet," Adriana said. She held his gaze. "I need time to build something airtight. Something that holds in a courtroom and not just in a room." "How long?" "Give me 2 weeks." Donovan nodded. He picked up the folder. He turned it over once in his hands. 2 weeks, he said. He was already thinking about the next move. The meeting with Bryce happened on a Tuesday. Wes had set it up, keeping his voice easy on the phone, the way he always did when he needed something without letting on that he needed it. He told Bryce they'd looked at the preliminary numbers and wanted to revisit the terms, that they were serious. Bryce said he'd been waiting for that call. They met at a coffee place downtown. Neutral ground, nothing formal. Bryce's suggestion. He arrived 4 minutes late and didn't apologize for it. He was wearing a jacket that probably cost more than a week of workshop payroll, and he shook hands like someone who'd practiced making it feel like a favor. "Glad you boys came around," he said, dropping into the chair across from them. "Boys." Donovan let it pass without a flicker. "We had some questions about the structure," Donovan said. "The ownership split as proposed. We wanted to understand the reasoning." Bryce waved a hand. "Standard for a deal this size. You retain operational control. We come in as silent partners, provide the capital injection. Everybody wins." "Right." Donovan nodded slowly. "Could you put that on paper for us? The split, the capital figure, the timeline." Bryce smiled. It was the smile of a man who thought he was watching 2 smaller fish swim toward his hook. "Absolutely. I'll have my guy draw up a term sheet this week." "Detailed," Wes said. "We'd want it detailed." "Of course." Bryce leaned back, relaxed. "Detailed is fine. You'll see it's a fair deal." They stayed 40 minutes. Bryce did most of the talking. He liked to hear himself think out loud, laying out scenarios, projecting growth numbers, using the word partnership the way some people used trust, often and loosely. Donovan listened. He asked just enough questions to keep Bryce writing things down in his notepad, sketching figures, circling percentages. Every number Bryce wrote down was another brick in the wall Adriana was building. They walked out to the street, and Wes waited until they were half a block from the entrance. "He thinks he's already won," Wes said. "I know," Donovan said. "Makes him sloppy." "I know that, too." The commission took a few days to arrange. Donovan had a contact, a woman named Claire, who ran a home decor shop and had bought 3 pieces from the workshop in the past 2 years. She knew Patrice Calloway through a neighborhood garden society, the kind of loose social thread that exists in every mid-sized city. Donovan called Claire, mentioned he was looking to expand his residential client base, and asked if she'd pass his name along to anyone who might be interested in a custom piece. He wasn't surprised when Patrice called. She had a warm voice, unhurried. She said she'd been thinking about a new dining table for a while, and Claire had spoken highly of his work. Donovan thanked her and asked a few questions about the space, the room size, the style of the house, whether she wanted something light or substantial. He listened carefully, not just to the answers, but to the person giving them. They agreed to meet at her home the following afternoon for a walkthrough of the space. Standard practice. He brought a measuring tape, a sample book of wood finishes, and a small notebook. The house was well kept and quiet, the kind of home that showed care without showing off. Patrice met him at the door in a light linen shirt, her hair pulled back simply. She was composed and polite, and she had sharp, attentive eyes that took him in without being rude about it. She showed him the dining room. He measured. He asked about the natural light, the ceiling height, whether she entertained often. "Enough," she said, with a small, tired smile that told him something she hadn't meant to share. Before he left, he handed her a card with a color sketch he'd roughed out on his notepad. Just a quick impression of the table he had in mind, proportions and grain direction. It was a genuine sketch. He was genuinely good at his job. "I'd value your honest opinion before I commit to anything," he said. "Feel free to call." She looked at the sketch for a moment, then tucked it into her hand. "I appreciate that," she said. "Most people don't ask." Kendra made his favorite meal that Friday. Grilled salmon, roasted vegetables, the good olive oil she saved for occasions, candles on the table, soft music from a speaker in the corner. He noticed all of it and said nothing about what it was. He sat down and ate and let her talk. She talked about starting fresh, about stress and misunderstandings and how much they'd both been carrying. Her voice was soft and practiced, and she reached across the table and touched his hand twice during the meal. After dinner, she slid a single sheet of paper across to him. An asset summary, their joint property, the savings accounts, a line near the bottom that referenced the workshop's holdings. "I just think," she said carefully, "if we're rebuilding this, we should each feel secure, protected. Signing this would show me you're serious about us." Donovan looked at the paper. He read every line. Then he set it down. "Let me think on it," he said. She smiled. Relieved, he thought. Or performing relief? It was getting harder to tell the difference with her. She went to bed at 10:30. Donovan sat at the kitchen table for a while longer. Then he opened his laptop and wrote a careful, factual email to Adriana, laying out the dinner, the paper she'd pushed across the table, and exactly what she'd asked him to sign. He attached a photo he'd taken of the document when Kendra stepped away to check on something in the kitchen. He hit send. Then he closed the laptop. Adriana called on a Thursday morning. She didn't say much on the phone, just, "Come by the office after noon. I found something." That was enough. Her office was on the 4th floor of a building downtown, clean, orderly, the kind of space that looked like the person inside it never wasted a single minute. Framed diplomas on one wall, a whiteboard with case notes she'd partially erased, stacks of folders lined up with their edges flush to the desk. She was standing when Donovan walked in, holding a manila folder like she'd been waiting to hand it to him. "Sit down," she said. He sat. She opened the folder and placed 3 documents in front of him, side by side, like evidence at a table, which was exactly what they were. His name was Marcus Webb, she said. He co-owned a small logistics company in Columbus. About 8 years ago, Bryce Calloway started sniffing around it the same way he's been sniffing around your shop. Investment interest, growth potential. He wanted in. Donovan looked at the first document. It was a business filing, a partnership amendment from 8 years back, adding Bryce's firm as a minority stakeholder in Webb's company. 6 months after he came in as a partner, Adriana continued, Webb's wife filed for divorce. The grounds were vague in the filing, but the timing lines up. She tapped the second document. Here, a settlement record. Webb bought Bryce's stake back out at nearly double what he paid for it. Signed under a confidentiality clause. He paid to get him out. He had to. By that point, Bryce had enough leverage, through the partnership terms and through what was happening with the marriage, that Webb had no other move. She paused. The confidentiality clause kept it quiet. Webb moved on. Bryce walked away with a return on investment that had nothing to do with the business performing well. Donovan picked up the settlement record and read it slowly. The numbers were right there in black ink, clean and cold. "How'd you find this?" he asked. "Business filings are public. Settlement records usually aren't. But the original lawsuit before the settlement was..." Webb tried to fight it first. He filed a fraud claim, then withdrew it when they reached the settlement. She sat down across from him. "Once I had Webb's name, the rest wasn't hard to find. It just takes knowing what to look for." Donovan set the paper down. He didn't feel surprise, exactly. He felt something closer to recognition, the slow, settling certainty of a thing you already suspected being confirmed in writing, like finally seeing a blueprint for something that had already been built around you. "So this is how he works," Donovan said. "This is how he works," Adriana said. "Relationship first, business second. Then he uses one to squeeze the other until you have no leverage left. The affair isn't separate from the investment. It never was. It's the whole mechanism." She leaned forward and tapped the third document, a spreadsheet she'd built herself. Every financial withdrawal Donovan and Wes had found cross-referenced with dates and amounts. The term sheet Bryce had written out at the coffee meeting, with the ownership split clearly stated. Kendra's asset summary from the dinner. Screenshots from the text thread. The business filings from Columbus. It was all one thing, laid out in Adriana's clean, precise handwriting along the margins. "This holds," she said. "Financially, legally. You have the affair documented. You have the fund transfers. You have Kendra pushing for the buyout conversation with Wes. You have the asset document she tried to get you to sign." She looked at him directly. "And now you have proof that the man doing this has done it before, in the same sequence, with the same result. That pattern is important. It removes any argument that this was accidental or opportunistic. It was premeditated," Donovan said. "It has the shape of premeditation, yes." The room was quiet for a moment. Donovan looked at the 3 documents again, at everything Adriana had laid out. Months of patience, of watching and gathering and not moving before the time was right. It had all led to this desk, this folder, these pages. "I want one meeting," he said. "Everybody in the same room. Bryce thinks he's closing a deal. I want it to happen that way. He walks in expecting to win." Adriana studied him. "You'll need to control the room." "I will." "And Patrice? She should be there," Donovan said. "She deserves to know. Not from a text message, not from a rumor. In person." Adriana nodded once. She didn't argue. She understood what he was building. Donovan picked up his phone from the armrest of the chair. He found Bryce's number and pressed call. It rang twice. "Donovan!" Bryce's voice was warm and loose, the tone of a man who thought he was close to the finish line. "Good timing. I was going to reach out today." "I figured we should move forward," Donovan said. "Lock down the final terms. I want to get everyone together. My partner, my counsel. Get it done properly." "Smart," Bryce said. "Very smart. When are you thinking?" "Monday," Donovan said. "Does that work?" "Monday works perfectly," Bryce said. Monday came in gray and still. The workshop was closed to clients for the morning. Donovan had arranged the back office the night before. Extra chairs pulled in, the small conference table cleared of sawdust and sample boards, replaced with a clean notepad, a water pitcher, and nothing else. Simple, deliberate, the kind of room that said, "This is serious." Wes arrived first, at 8. He poured himself a coffee and didn't say much. He'd learned, over the past several weeks, that Donovan didn't need encouragement at this stage. He just needed the people around him to hold steady. Adriana came in at 8:30 with her briefcase and a second folder, thicker than the one from Thursday. She set it at the head of the table, laid a pen across the top, and took her seat. They waited. Bryce pulled up at 9 on the dot in a silver car that cost more than most people's first home. He came through the workshop's side entrance in a charcoal blazer, a pressed shirt open at the collar, smelling like money and confidence. He glanced around the office, clocked Wes, clocked Adriana, then landed on Donovan with an easy smile. "Nice setup," he said. "Didn't know you had a lawyer." "Every serious business has one," Donovan said. "Sit down, Bryce." Bryce sat. He set his phone face up on the table, a small dominance move, the kind a man makes without thinking, and leaned back in his chair like he owned the room. "So," he said, "let's talk terms." "We will," Donovan said. "But first, we're going to look at a few things." Adriana opened the folder without waiting for an invitation. She placed the first sheet in front of Bryce, a printout of the bank statements, the withdrawals highlighted in yellow, the dates and amounts running down the page in a neat, damning column. Bryce looked at it. He didn't move. "This is a record of 31 withdrawals from our business contingency fund," Donovan said, "made over the past 6 months. Steady amounts, consistent timing, cross-referenced with hotel charges, restaurant bills, and a watch purchase at a retailer downtown." He paused. "You know the watch. Kendra picked it out." Bryce's jaw shifted slightly. "I don't know what you're implying." "I'm not implying anything," Donovan said. "I'm showing you documents." Adriana placed the second sheet down. The text screenshots, printed clean and labeled with dates. Bryce looked at them. The easy posture he'd walked in with was still there on the surface, but something underneath it had gone tight. "Okay," he said, and he let out a short laugh, the kind designed to make the other person feel like they were overreacting. "Look, whatever you think is going on here, we don't think," Wes said from across the table. It was the first thing he'd said since Bryce sat down. Quiet, flat, final. Bryce looked at him, recalibrated, then looked back at Donovan. "This is a personal matter," Bryce said, his tone shifting to something smoother. "Reasonable, almost sympathetic. It's got nothing to do with the business arrangement. You're smart enough to separate the two." "You didn't separate them," Donovan said. "That's the point." He nodded to Adriana. She placed the third document down. The business filing from Columbus, the partnership amendment with Bryce's name on it, the settlement record below it, the numbers clear and cold. Bryce went still. "Marcus Webb," Donovan said. "Columbus. 8 years ago." He let that sit for exactly 1 second. "Same entry, same structure. You came in as a partner, used the marriage to build leverage, and walked away with double your stake when he had nothing left to fight with." Donovan's voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. "This isn't the first time you've run this." Bryce stared at the settlement record. For a moment, his face was unreadable. A man doing fast, private math with no good answer waiting at the end of it. Then the door to the office opened. Patrice Calloway stepped in. She was dressed quietly, her coat still on, her expression the kind of composed that comes from having already done your grieving before you walked through the door. She'd seen the documents on Friday. She'd had the weekend to sit with them. She hadn't called Donovan back until Sunday night. And when she did, all she said was, "I'll be there." Bryce's face went slack. "Patrice, don't," she said. It wasn't loud. It didn't have to be. She looked at the documents on the table. Then she looked at her husband, really looked at him, with the steady, clear-eyed gaze of someone who no longer had any illusions left to protect. "I kept thinking I was missing something," she said. "Some explanation that would make this make sense." She shook her head, just once. "There isn't one." The side door opened again. Kendra came in expecting a business update. That was what Donovan had told her. "Come by the office. Monday morning, there are some things we should align on before the deal closes." She was dressed for it. Professional? Composed? She had her bag on her shoulder and her phone in her hand, and she was already looking at Bryce to gauge his mood. Then she saw Patrice. Then she saw the documents spread across the table. Her face didn't fall slowly. It dropped all at once, like something structural had given way beneath it. And, for the first time in months, Kendra Reese had absolutely nothing to say. Bryce stood with his mouth open, looking between his wife and the table and the door, and finding no exit in any direction. Patrice picked up her bag from the floor where she'd set it, straightened her coat, and walked out of the office without looking at him again. The door clicked shut behind her, and Kendra just stood there, her composure gone, her hands at her sides, in front of every person in that room. The meeting ended without ceremony. Bryce left without a word, his phone already at his ear before he reached the parking lot. Kendra left a few minutes later, walking fast, not looking back. The side door swung shut behind her, and the workshop went quiet again. Just the three of them, the table, and the document. Donovan gathered the papers himself. He stacked them neatly, squared the edges, and handed them back to Adriana. "Good," she said. That was all. Wes poured the remaining coffee down the sink, rinsed the cups, and turned off the light in the back office. They didn't need to say much. The work was done. What came next would come on its own. It spread the way things spread in professional circles, not online, not in posts or public threads, but through phone calls made on lunch breaks, through lowered voices at dinner tables, through the kind of conversation that starts with, "I don't know if you heard," and ends with a long silence. By Wednesday, 3 of Bryce's colleagues at the investment firm had been pulled into a closed-door meeting with HR. By Thursday, the firm had retained outside counsel. By Friday, an internal notice had gone out, brief, careful, written to say nothing while confirming everything, and Bryce Calloway's name had been quietly removed from the firm's website. The conflict of interest was one thing. The prior settlement record from Columbus was something else entirely. When the firm's own attorneys cross-referenced the pattern, they didn't hesitate. They severed ties quickly and cleanly, the way companies do when the goal is containment rather than justice. Patrice filed for divorce that same week. Donovan heard it secondhand through Adriana, who heard it through a paralegal in a connected firm. There was no drama attached to the news. No scene, no statement, just a filing number and a date. That was Patrice. No performance, just clarity. Kendra's situation unwound slower and harder. Her employer had been doing business with Bryce's investment firm for over a year. A corporate partnership that nobody on Kendra's floor had thought to question. Because why would they? But when Bryce's firm came under internal scrutiny, the paper trail that followed ran directly through Kendra's expense reports. Irregular charges, vendor approvals that didn't match standard process. Small amounts, routed carefully, but the kind of thing that becomes visible the moment someone is actually looking. Her employer launched an inquiry on a Tuesday. By Thursday, She'd been placed on administrative leave. Donovan knew because she called him, twice, in the same afternoon. First in a voice that was trying to stay controlled, then in a voice that wasn't. He let both calls go to voicemail. Adriana's filings had been ready for days before the meeting. She'd built it carefully: ownership verification, the misappropriation documentation, the trail of withdrawals from both the marital savings and the contingency fund. Everything organized, everything dated, everything sourced. The court moved efficiently. Donovan formally retained full ownership of the workshop, sole and undisputed. The misappropriated funds were ordered returned from the marital accounts, which left Kendra's share of those accounts significantly reduced, down to what she'd actually contributed, which was far less than what she'd tried to walk away with. None of what she'd maneuvered for was there anymore. Not the stake in the business, not the savings she'd quietly redirected, not the future she'd been building on top of someone else's foundation. She had what she came in with. Nothing more. She came to the house on a Saturday afternoon, unannounced. Donovan heard the key in the lock and was already in the kitchen when she came through the door. She looked tired. The precision she usually carried herself with, the posture, the deliberate way she dressed, the sense that she was always aware of how she appeared, had softened at the edges. She set her bag down near the door and didn't come further into the room. "I just want to talk," she said. Donovan set down the glass he'd been rinsing. He turned and looked at her. Not with anger. Not with anything that moved on his face. "I've made mistakes. I know that. But everything we had, everything we built together, I don't think that should just disappear." Her voice was steady. "I think if we sat down, really sat down, we could—" "Kendra." His voice was quiet, even. It didn't leave room for an interruption. "There's nothing left to discuss." She looked at him, waiting, maybe, for a crack in it. Some give. Some sign that the door wasn't entirely closed. There wasn't one. "The house goes on the market at the end of next month," he said. "I need you out by the end of this one." He picked up his glass, turned back to the sink, and finished rinsing it. She stood in the kitchen doorway for a moment longer. Then she picked up her bag from the floor. The front door opened. The front door closed. Donovan set the glass in the rack to dry and stood at the counter for a moment, his hands resting on the edge of it, looking out the small window above the sink at the gray afternoon outside. Then he went back to work. The wait list had grown to 14 clients by the time spring came around. Donovan noticed it first as a logistical problem. Not enough hours in the week, not enough hands. He and Wes had a conversation about it on a Tuesday morning over bad coffee and a legal pad, the same way they'd made every major decision since they started. By the end of the hour, they had a plan. Bring on one part-time craftsman, extend the delivery windows by 3 weeks across the board, and raise the base rate. It was the third rate increase in 8 months. Nobody on the wait list walked away. "We're building something real," Wes said, capping his pen. Donovan looked at the list of names, 14 people who had found them, made a call, and decided to wait. "We always were," he said. Wes had been a full equal partner for 3 months now. The paperwork had been clean and simple. Adriana drafted it in an afternoon, and the shift between them had been even simpler, because in practice nothing had changed. Wes had always worked like a man who owned the place. Now it was just true on paper, too. He'd moved his things into the second office, put a small cactus on the windowsill, and otherwise gotten on with it. The workshop itself felt different now, not louder, not busier in any frantic way, but settled, purposeful, like a room that finally had the right furniture in it. On Monday, Wednesday, and Friday mornings, Donovan still drove to Iron Gate before the city woke up. That hadn't changed. What had changed was Thursday afternoons. He'd started the kids' class almost by accident. Marcus, who ran Iron Gate and had been Donovan's instructor since the beginning, had asked him in passing if he'd consider it. Just 6 kids, Ages 8 to 11. 1 hour, basic fundamentals. Donovan had said yes before he'd really thought it through, and then showed up the following Thursday to find 8 kids, not 6, all of them looking at him like he was going to say something important. He hadn't known quite what to do with that. So he'd just started. By spring, the class had 12 students. Some were timid at first, hanging back near the wall, unsure of their own arms and legs. Donovan remembered that feeling. Not the timidity exactly, but the early strangeness of learning how your body actually moved when you asked it to do something precise. He was patient with them in a way that surprised even him. Not because he'd expected to be impatient, but because he hadn't expected to care quite this much about getting it right. He never told them what discipline was for. He just showed them stance, breath, how to fall without panic, how to stay calm when something moved fast. The understanding, if it came, would come on its own. Marcus watched from the doorway sometimes, arms folded, saying nothing. Just watching. After one Thursday session, as Donovan was gathering the training pads from the floor, Marcus said simply, "You're good at this." Donovan stacked the pads against the wall. "They're good kids," he said. Word came back about Bryce and Kendra the way it always did. Not sought, just occasionally delivered. A mutual contact, a brief mention, the kind of update that arrived without announcement and required no response. Bryce was working for a mid-sized property management company in another city. Lower title, smaller salary, the kind of job that didn't come with a company profile or a business card worth keeping. No one said it with satisfaction, it was just the information. Kendra had found work again, something in communications, contract-based, nothing close to what she'd held before. Her professional reputation hadn't collapsed entirely, but it had contracted. The people who'd once vouched for her had grown quiet. You couldn't recover from a certain kind of exposure just by waiting it out, and she was learning that the hard way, alone. Donovan heard these things, absorbed them, and moved on. Not with coldness, not with any particular feeling at all. The matter was closed. It had been closed for months. What happened to them now was theirs to carry, not his. He didn't have room for it anymore. He had work to do. He locked up the workshop alone on a Thursday evening in late April, after Wes had left and the part-time craftsman had clocked out. The last task before the lights was a final check on the piece sitting near the front. A dining table, walnut with hand-cut dovetail joints, built for a couple in Riverside who'd been on the wait list since October. It was finished. Had been finished since Tuesday, but Donovan had looked at it every day since, adjusting nothing, just looking. It was one of the better pieces he'd made in recent memory. Clean, solid, built to last longer than anyone in the room would. He rested his hand flat on the surface for a moment. The wood was smooth and cool under his palm. He turned off the last light. He stepped outside, pulled the door closed behind him, and locked it. The evening was mild. The parking lot was empty. Somewhere down the block, a dog barked once and went quiet. Donovan put his keys in his pocket and walked to his truck, unhurried, carrying nothing heavy. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.